The early morning sun spilled softly through the beige curtains as Amara stirred from sleep. Her first thought was not of herself, but of Chike, her husband of 7 years, who had taken ill 2 weeks ago. At 35, Amara had shaped her life around caring for others. Even with a demanding job as a senior admin in a logistics firm, she still managed to come home daily to cook fresh food, rub her husband's feet, and whisper prayers over his sleeping body. Her friends called her too traditional, but she believed in marriage, in keeping a home, in loyalty. She believed her husband, Chike, was simply going through a bad phase, one of those strange spiritual attacks that came for good men trying to rise. He had been coughing, acting weak, and claiming fatigue. The doctor said nothing was physically wrong, so Amara doubled down on prayer. She even turned down an out-of-state training that could have advanced her career, just so she could be close to him. Love required sacrifice, she was sure of it. Their home in Acadia was modest but comfortable. Amara had chosen warm earth tones for the walls, and her hand-painted scripture frames adorned the hall. She smiled faintly as she heated fresh pepper soup and pounded yam, Chike's favorite. He hadn't eaten well the night before, and she'd spent the evening dabbing his sweaty forehead. She planned to surprise him by returning from work early. She'd left a bit after 9 a.m., managed a few urgent tasks at the office, then asked for permission to leave. Her manager, an older man she admired, granted it with a gentle nod. "You're a good woman, Amara," he said. "Some men don't know what they have." She smiled in return, not knowing how painfully true those words would soon feel. Her heart full, she bought fresh fruits and suya on the way. She was excited, hopeful that maybe her husband would smile again if he just felt cared for enough. She hummed to herself as she entered the compound and unlocked the front door quietly, wanting to surprise him. The house was silent, which was normal. Chike often napped during the day, but as she stepped further in, heading toward the bedroom, she noticed something off. A woman's handbag was on the center table, bright red, not hers. Then she heard it, a woman's laugh. Familiar, chilling. Her heart stumbled in her chest. She crept down the hallway, barefoot now, pepper soup flask still in her hand. The bedroom door wasn't fully closed. She heard the soft bounce of their bed, the stifled laughter, and then Chike's voice, low, playful, nothing like the weak, sick man she nursed. The voice that replied sent her entire body into paralysis. It was Ngozi, her younger sister, the same girl she raised, fed, and protected. And the voice wasn't one of panic or guilt. It was cruel, mocking, alive. "She'll be back soon," Chike whispered. Ngozi giggled. "Let her come. She's not even woman enough to keep you satisfied." Amara's knees buckled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Time slowed. Amara stood frozen outside the door, her hand trembling as the flask in her grip slipped and hit the floor with a dull thud. She didn't move. She couldn't. Inside, the rhythm of betrayal continued, careless and unashamed. Ngozi's voice became louder, bolder. "You're always pretending to be sick when she's around," she laughed. "I bet she even prays for you with her holy water while you're here, giving me life." Chike laughed too, his tone laced with the arrogance of a man who had gotten away with too much for too long. "She's too stiff. Always quoting Bible. You make me feel like a man." That sentence sliced Amara open, not because it was true, but because she had believed so deeply in the lie of their love. She had kissed his forehead. She had begged God for his healing. She had turned down an international trip because she thought he needed her. And all this while, he had needed someone else, her sister. She took a step back, her breath shallow, struggling not to make a sound. Her body screamed for confrontation, but her spirit told her to be still. If she walked in, they would twist it. Make her the villain. Blame her for being cold, too busy, too churchy. Her fingers brushed the wall as she stumbled into the hallway, knees weak, breath caught between sobs and screams she wouldn't allow herself to release. She couldn't let them see her broken. Not yet. Not like this. She sat on the stairs, staring at nothing, her mind playing back every kind gesture she had ever made for them both. She remembered buying Ngozi her first phone, cooking for her during university breaks, paying part of her school fees. She remembered introducing Chike to her family, and how Ngozi had smiled that day. She had mistaken that smile for sisterly joy. Now she knew better. Amara rose slowly, collected herself, picked up the fallen flask, and walked out of the house without a word. She didn't slam the door. She didn't shout. She didn't confront. She simply left. The sun was still shining, but her heart was buried in cold darkness. She got into her car and sat behind the wheel, staring out the windshield for a full 30 minutes. A neighbor passed and waved. She waved back, her dignity wrapped tightly around her like armor. That day, something in Amara died, but something else, something stronger, was born. A resolve, a kind of quiet fire. She wasn't sure what she would do yet, but she knew one thing. She would not fall apart in public. She would bleed in silence. And then, one day, she would rise so high they would choke on their laughter. The next morning, Amara didn't go to work. She called in sick for the first time in years. But it wasn't her body that was sick, it was her soul. She spent the entire day in silence, lying in bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed several times, messages from Chike, checking in like nothing happened. A few were from Mgoi, a meme here, a joke there, like a devil dancing in her inbox. Amara didn't respond. She wasn't ready. Her heart was torn, her mind replaying every detail. How long had it been going on? Did it start after that family barbecue 2 years ago? Or was it that time she caught Chike looking at Mgoi a second too long and told herself she was being paranoid? The shame wasn't just in the betrayal. It was in the memory of how much she had ignored, how much she had trusted. She had been the fool at her own wedding. Later that evening, she invited Mgoi over alone. Her voice calm over the phone, warm even. She said she missed her, wanted to talk. And, as expected, Mgoi came, all smiles and fake innocence, wearing one of the dresses Amara bought her on her last birthday. "Auntie Ama," she said playfully. "You're looking like a ghost. What happened?" Amara simply stared. "How long?" she asked. Mgoi blinked, thrown off. "I don't understand." Amara's voice remained level. "How long have you been sleeping with my husband?" Mgoi paused, then smirked. No fear, no apology. "Since he realized you don't know how to keep a man warm at night," she said, rolling her eyes. "I mean, you're his wife, but you act like his mother. You feed him, pray for him, but you don't satisfy him." Then, as if it wasn't cruel enough, Mgoi placed her hand on her belly and added, "And guess what? I'm carrying his child. That's why he chose me over you." The words crashed through Amara like thunder. But still, she didn't scream. She didn't slap. She didn't cry. She simply nodded and said, "You can leave now." Mgoi, feeling victorious, walked out laughing. She thought she had won. But as the door shut, Amara whispered to herself, "You've both written your own ending, and I will watch it unfold." The following week was a twisted display of sisterhood turned sour. Mgoi began acting bolder, more entitled. She came to the house more often now, sometimes without knocking, walking into Amara's kitchen like she owned it. She would stand by the door and make comments like, "This kitchen is too small for a growing family, don't you think?" Chike, who once used to panic when Amara raised an eyebrow, now laughed along with her sister's jabs. The betrayal had moved from private whispers to public taunts, and it seemed they both reveled in the humiliation. Amara noticed how Chike no longer pretended to be sick. His voice was fuller, his walk stronger. She also noticed how he avoided her touch. Her once beloved husband now recoiled when she brushed his arm and flinched at her prayers. Everything she once trusted had turned sour, and the woman who once called her sister had become her tormentor. Amara tried to remain calm, but the emotional warfare Mgoi launched was relentless. One Sunday afternoon, during a family visit, Mgoi loudly told their mother, "Some wives don't know what their men really want. They think cooking soup is enough." The insult was thinly veiled, but the room understood. Her mother shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak. Chike chuckled softly and placed a possessive hand on Ngozi's waist, right there in front of the whole family. Amara's heart broke in fresh layers. Not only had her sister stolen her husband, but she was parading the betrayal with no shame. And no one stood up for her, not even her own mother. Instead, her mother muttered something about women these days needing to be wise, implying Amara was at fault. It was as if the pain she was enduring meant nothing, as if the shame was hers alone to bear. That night, Amara sat alone in the living room with the lights off. Her tears had dried into a kind of numbness. She stared at the wall for hours, fingers clenched around her scarf. She remembered how she had raised Ngozi after their father died, how she stayed up late to help her study, how she gave up buying clothes to pay her WEC fees. And this was the repayment? Her sister had not just stolen her husband, but now mocked her for it. Amara didn't scream. She didn't retaliate. She didn't curse. But something had shifted deep within her, a hardness replacing her softness. She realized no one was coming to save her. Her family had abandoned her, her husband had replaced her, and her sister had humiliated her. The only person left to protect Amara was Amara. And that woman was done playing the fool. Amara began to move like a ghost in her own house. She stopped speaking unless spoken to. She stopped cooking for Chike, no longer waking early to heat his water or warm his food. She didn't ask where he was going or who he was with. And strangely, this silence seemed to make Chike more irritable. It was as though her quiet dignity began to eat at his conscience, though he would never admit it. He started sleeping out more often, at late meetings or business dinners, but Amara knew better. He didn't even bother hiding the strands of Ngozi's braids stuck on his collar anymore. Her perfume lingered on him like an insult. Amara knew their affair had moved into full-blown obsession. Mgoi had successfully inserted herself into the space Amara once called hers, and she was now building a kingdom on the ashes of Amara's heartbreak. In public, the situation became even more humiliating. One morning, Amara stepped outside to go to work and found a shiny red Toyota parked in front of their gate, Ngozi's. She had come to spend the night. Again. She strolled out minutes later, belly growing larger, skin glowing, makeup flawless. She glanced at Amara and smirked. "Oh, you're still around?" she asked casually. "You're stronger than I thought. If I were you, I would have left already." That sentence pierced through Amara like a dagger. But still, she said nothing. Her only reply was the quiet shut of her car door as she drove off. At work, her colleagues whispered. Some asked her indirectly if she was okay. Others simply avoided her entirely, as if the scent of betrayal was contagious. Her silence was misread as weakness. But inside, Amara's spirit was sharpening itself like a blade. One night, after a particularly cruel episode, where Chike publicly introduced Ngozi as the mother of his child at a friend's birthday party, Amara stood by the window in their bedroom and watched the rain fall. Her face was expressionless, but her soul was screaming. "God, what did I do to deserve this?" She whispered. The only answer was thunder. And that was when she knew she couldn't keep hoping for pity. She had to begin thinking, strategizing, surviving. She was not going to go down quietly. She was not going to let her story end like this. It was no longer about saving a marriage. It was about saving herself. And if that meant walking through fire silently while her enemies danced, she would. But one day, when the music stopped, they would look around and realize that the woman they mocked had become the storm they couldn't escape. It was the last Friday of the month, a casual dress day at the office, when the final blow to Amara's dignity came crashing in. As she stepped out of the building during her lunch break, she was greeted by a small crowd gathered near the gate, murmuring and pointing at something. Her heart sank when she realized what they were staring at, a brand new red Lexus, parked intentionally near the entrance, with Ngozi stepping out in a tight-fitting gown that flaunted her pregnancy. She looked around deliberately until her eyes landed on Amara. Then she smiled, a long, victorious smile, and waved like she was greeting a fan. She had come to pick up Chike, who was attending a nearby conference. Amara stood frozen, watching as her sister leaned against the car and posed while people took discreet pictures. It was a slap to her soul. A staged spectacle meant to mock her pain in front of the entire office compound. As if on cue, Chike appeared minutes later, holding his phone and laughing loudly. He didn't even glance at Amara. He walked straight to Ngozi, kissed her cheek, and opened the car door for her like a king unveiling his queen. The watching crowd began to whisper louder now. Some pitied Amara, others sneered. A few colleagues avoided her eyes altogether, ashamed for her. But no one said a word. She stood there, her ID badge still around her neck, clutching her brown file folder with trembling fingers. Her eyes remained dry, but inside her chest, something cracked open and spilled into a depth of despair she had never known before. It was not just the betrayal, it was the performance, the intentional cruelty, the reminder that no matter how graceful she remained, she was being ridiculed like a rejected old bride. Later that evening, alone in the house again, Amara sat on the floor of the kitchen, the same kitchen she used to lovingly cook for Chike. Her scarf hung loosely around her head, and her hands trembled as she held a glass of water she couldn't even drink. She remembered how she used to scrub these floors on Sundays while Chike slept, how she used to whistle as she prepared his favorite egusi soup. Now, she barely had the strength to boil water. Her pride was in pieces, her heart was ash, and her name was a joke in whispers. But still, she did not break publicly. She refused to. Somewhere deep in the silence of that moment, Amara made a vow, not to fight Ngozi or Chike with words, but to fight with results. They wanted a reaction. She would give them silence. But her silence would be the loudest scream they would ever hear. The living room of their family compound in Enugu buzzed with the usual weekend chatter. Plastic chairs were scattered around, with cousins and aunties exchanging stories over bowls of jollof rice and chilled malt. Amara sat quietly at the corner, her gown modest, her expression calm yet haunted. She had driven down from Lagos for her mother's 60th birthday, determined to maintain peace. But peace had become a stranger. Ngozi walked in late, fashionably dressed in a bright orange lace gown that clung to her pregnant body like an announcement. Her makeup was loud, her jewelry louder. On her arm was Chike. He smiled too broadly, acting like the son-in-law of the year. Murmurs began immediately. Old aunties leaned into one another, whispering behind raised palms. Some threw sympathetic glances at Amara. Others chuckled, the spectacle too juicy to ignore. But Amara sat still, her back straight, her silence deafening. As the afternoon wore on, Ngozi took every opportunity to mock Amara with subtle stabs wrapped in smiles. And now, some women don't understand that men need more than food and prayers, she said loudly during a conversation about marriage. You can be a wife and still be a stranger in your husband's bed. That's why we must balance the equation ABI. Everyone laughed nervously. Even Amara's mother gave a tight smile, saying nothing. Amara felt like a stranger in her own family. Her father's portrait hung on the wall above them, and she wished for a moment that he were alive. He would have shut Ngozi down. He would have protected her. But the room was filled with betrayal wrapped in silence. Chike didn't say a word to Amara, not even hello. He followed Ngozi like a trophy, proudly patting her belly and whispering in her ear, while Amara's pain was broadcast for all to see. Later, when Amara excused herself to the backyard for air, Ngozi followed. She leaned against the concrete wall, arms folded, staring at Amara like a queen addressing a servant. You look thinner, she said smugly. Heartbreak doesn't suit you. Amara didn't respond. She didn't flinch. She just stared ahead at the mango tree they used to climb as children. Ngozi stepped closer. You know, you were always the perfect one, the holy one, everyone's role model. Well, look who got the man, the child, and the last laugh. Amara turned slowly to face her sister and replied, Enjoy the laugh, Ngozi. Make it loud. Because laughter that starts in betrayal always ends in tears. Ngozi scoffed and walked away, but a flicker of unease flashed across her face as she disappeared into the house. For the first time, Amara's voice hadn't cracked. She hadn't begged. She hadn't wept. And that silence shook something in Ngozi she didn't understand. 2 days later, back in Lagos, Chike came home to find Amara seated at the dining table. She had prepared a simple dinner, jollof rice and grilled fish. It was the first time in weeks she had cooked. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just pushed the plate toward him when he entered, as if he were a stranger at a restaurant. Chike looked at the food, then at her. What's this? He asked, confused. Food, she replied plainly. Or do you prefer Ngozi's? Her tone was sharp, laced with something dangerous. Chike scoffed and dropped his bag on the couch. So you finally want to talk, he said, sitting across from her. Good. Let me tell you something, Amara. You were never enough for me. You were a stepping stone, a phase. I married you because you had a job and a good head. But you never excited me. The words sliced through the air like a machete. Amara didn't blink. She simply listened. Chike leaned back in his chair, suddenly emboldened. Ngozi may be your sister, but she makes me feel like a man. She listens, she plays, she touches. You? You always made me feel like a project. Like I was broken and you were fixing me. I got tired of being your charity case. Amara's jaw tightened, but still she said nothing. Chike smirked. You want honesty? That's it. I stopped loving you a long time ago. I just didn't know how to leave without looking like the bad guy. But Ngozi? She made it easy. And soon you'll be out of here. Quietly. Just the way you like it. The confidence in his voice was disgusting. His cruelty wasn't even masked anymore. He truly believed he had won. That he had broken her. Amara stood, picked up the untouched plate of food, and walked to the kitchen sink. She emptied it slowly, methodically, like someone washing away the past. Chike didn't stop her. He didn't apologize. He simply turned on the television and began scrolling through channels. She watched him from the kitchen doorway, her face unreadable. You're right, Chike, she said finally. You stopped being a man when you chose to build your pride on another woman's shame. You didn't fall in love. You fell into convenience. Then she turned and walked away. That night, she didn't cry. Instead, she stayed up and began to update her CV. If he thought she would crumble, he was wrong. If Ngozi thought she had stolen a husband, she was mistaken. What she took was a burden. And what Amara was about to gain was peace. The days that followed moved like a blur. Amara no longer greeted the neighbors when she walked out. She wore her emotions like a shell, cold, quiet, unapproachable. The news of the affair had spread in hushed tones through the church. The same women who once called her Mummy Gio now avoided her pew. The deacon's wife smiled too tightly. Her prayer partner suddenly had urgent meetings every evening. It was as if her pain had turned her into a virus, one no one wanted to catch. Betrayal, when public, felt like death. But unlike death, no one sent flowers. People just looked away. Amara bore it all in silence, never raising her voice, never confronting anyone. But something about her changed. Her clothes became more fitted, her hair always neatly packed. She walked straighter, spoke less, listened more. The old Amara, the soft one, was gone. In her place stood a woman made of iron. Chike and Ngozi, however, grew louder. They showed up at events together, no longer pretending. Ngozi wore matching outfits with Chike and flaunted her pregnancy like a trophy. The mockery was deliberate. She had once whispered insults behind Amara's back. Now she shouted them through social media captions. A man who knows what he wants, she wrote under a photo of Chike holding her belly. God is faithful. Amara saw the post. She said nothing. But inside a storm brewed. She didn't hate them. No. Hatred gave power. She pitted them. Because everything they built was on stolen ground. And stolen things never last. She had stopped praying for restoration. Now she prayed for clarity. And clarity came. Every insult was fuel. Every humiliation a stepping stone. And in the darkest hour of betrayal, Amara discovered something she never thought she had: strategy. She began to shift focus at work. Volunteered for projects no one wanted. Stayed late. Read financial reports. Her boss noticed. He called her into his office one afternoon. You're changing, he said. You're stronger than before. Sharper. Amara smiled gently. Pain sharpens people, sir. He nodded slowly. I like this version of you. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not as a woman discarded, but as a woman becoming. Her boss, a tall, well-respected man named Mr. Osakwi, began to include her in meetings with senior management. She was rising not through pity, but performance. And, all the while, Chike was too busy living in ego to notice the ground shifting beneath his feet. But very soon, the same man who mocked her silence would be silenced by her success. The day Amara truly broke wasn't loud. It didn't come with shouting or furniture flying through the air. It came in the form of a moment, so quiet it felt like the world itself had gone still. It was a Sunday evening. Chike and Mgoi had just returned from a baby shower thrown for them by one of Chike's business partners. Amara hadn't been invited, obviously. But that wasn't what shattered her. What broke her was finding Ngozi's shoes, her used wrapper, and even her lipstick tube carelessly tossed across their living room floor. Her living room. The very couch where Amara once sat and prayed for their marriage was now drenched in Ngozi's perfume and arrogance. Chike walked past her like she didn't exist, went straight into the bathroom, and began humming. Mgoi, bold as ever, walked in, looked Amara in the eye, and asked, "Hope you cleaned the bedroom?" The smile she wore was venomous. It was the kind of look someone gives you when they believe they've won completely. Amara didn't respond. Instead, she walked slowly into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of cold water. Her hands trembled. Her vision blurred. She stood there for almost 10 minutes, the coldness of the water glass pressing against her palm, trying to ground herself in a world that no longer made sense. Her thoughts spiraled through years of sacrifice, her skipped promotions, her sleepless nights during Chike's job hunts, the loans she took to fund his failed businesses. She remembered the fasting, the vigils, the marriage counselor who said, "Be patient. Men change." And now, this was her reward. A husband who mocked her faithfulness, and a sister who walked through her pain like a queen on a red carpet. Her chest tightened as a silent scream tore through her soul. But still she didn't cry. Not yet. She placed the glass down, went into her room, and locked the door. And that night, she did something she had never done before. She didn't pray for Chike. She didn't pray for healing. She didn't pray for restoration. She prayed for strength. Just strength. "God, if you still see me, give me strength to walk through this fire and not come out smelling like smoke," she whispered. Her voice cracked for the first time in weeks. And finally, the tears came. But these weren't the same tears. These weren't the weak, begging tears of a woman asking for mercy. These were cleansing tears. The kind of tears that baptize a woman into a new version of herself. When she slept that night, she dreamed of walking alone through a burning village, barefoot and bleeding, but smiling, because she had survived. When she woke up, she opened the curtains, cleaned her room, and dressed herself like someone going into battle. Something in her had changed. She was no longer waiting for them to break her. They already had. And now it was her turn. By Monday morning, Amara was a different woman. Her walk had purpose, her silence was heavier, and her eyes no longer searched for validation. She arrived at the office earlier than usual, not out of habit, but intention. She sat at her desk and began reviewing financial statements from departments she wasn't even assigned to, just to learn. She downloaded business analysis reports. She wrote proposals. She didn't speak much, but when she did, people listened. There was something magnetic about her energy now. The whispers around her shifted from pity to curiosity. Mr. Osakwe, her boss, noticed it too. He invited her to sit in on a high-level meeting. At first, Amara hesitated, unsure if she was truly ready to be seen again. But then she remembered Ngozi's laughter, Chike's smirk, and the sting of public shame. That was the fuel. She straightened her shoulders, walked into the boardroom, and delivered a performance that made senior executives take notice. After the meeting, Mr. Osakwe called her to his office. He didn't beat around the bush. "You're not the same woman who works here quietly anymore," he said. "You're sharper, focused. What changed?" Amara smiled gently and said, "Pain teaches you things even books can't." He nodded slowly. "Pain made you powerful," he said. "And power is useful, Amara." He began assigning her to larger projects. He told her to represent the company at an upcoming logistics summit in Port Harcourt. The same Amara, who had once been too afraid to leave Chike alone at home for a weekend, was now packing her bags for business trips. And this time, she didn't care where he was. She didn't tell him. She didn't ask for permission. When she walked through the airport that Friday, sleek suitcase in hand, Ankara jacket hugging her curves, and confident heels clicking against the tiles, heads turned. Not because she looked beautiful, but because she looked reborn. That trip changed everything. She met powerful women in her industry who admired her intelligence. She was approached by investors who wanted to hear her ideas. She spoke on a panel about sustainable logistics and received a standing ovation. For the first time in years, Amara felt more than a wife, more than a victim. She felt like a force. And in that moment, she realized that the betrayal had been a blessing in disguise. If Chike had remained faithful, she would have remained small. If Mgoi hadn't mocked her, she would have remained hidden. But now she was awake. Her worth no longer depended on who loved her, who stayed, or who betrayed her. Her worth came from what she had built inside herself. When she returned to Lagos, she didn't bring home bitterness. She brought back power, quiet power. And with that power, she began building something her enemies would never see coming. While Amara was rising silently, cracks began to show in Chike and Ngozi's picture-perfect scandal. At first, they thought their affair was the beginning of a new empire. But slowly, the glamour started to rot. Chike had assumed that leaving Amara emotionally, and eventually physically, would bring him peace. He thought having a woman who worshipped him, who called him daddy and made him feel important, would fill the gap Amara's quiet strength once filled. But Ngozi wasn't a wife. She was a performance. She wanted gifts, attention, constant praise. Her pregnancy made her even more demanding. And when Chike's cash began to dry up, because Amara no longer took care of bills, rent, groceries, Ngozi's tone began to shift. She called him stingy, accused him of cheating, and complained endlessly about stretch marks and cravings. The romance began to feel like a trap. Chike's business deals started failing. One investor pulled out without explanation. A company that once relied on him suddenly ended their contract. He didn't know it yet, but Mr. Osakwe had quietly begun phasing him out. He'd seen Chike's arrogance, and now that Amara was rising, the comparison was too glaring to ignore. Chike started drinking more, staying out later, coming home to Ngozi with less patience. He snapped at her one night when she asked for money for baby clothes, shouting, "Must everything be about money? What do you even do except eat and sleep?" The slap Ngozi gave him echoed down the hallway. For the first time, he saw her not as a fantasy, but as a mirror of his own ugliness. The very thing he had once praised was now suffocating him, and the woman he once humiliated was nowhere to be found. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't ask. And that silence? That silence began to feel like punishment. Ngozi tried to reach Amara once, sending a text late at night. "I know you hate me, but you don't understand what he's become." Amara read it and deleted it. She owed no one answers. Let them reap what they sowed. She had warned them both that betrayal builds palaces out of paper. And now, as the wind of reality began to blow, Chike and Ngozi were starting to feel the tremble. The woman they had mocked had become invisible, and in her invisibility, she had become the most powerful person in their story. Amara was no longer broken. She was becoming, and soon, she would not need to lift a finger for her revenge to land. Because karma was already setting the table, Chike's world began to shrink in ways he hadn't anticipated. At work, his presence no longer commanded attention. Where junior staff once stood when he entered a room, now they barely looked up from their desks. His reports were returned with red marks, his project budgets were questioned, and key emails began to mysteriously exclude him. It was subtle at first, changes that he blamed on stress or bad luck. But one morning, he overheard two interns in the hallway whispering, "How did someone like him even get promoted? I heard Amara used to cover for him." That was the first time her name rang in his ear like a bell he had tried to silence. He realized then that while he had been distracted with lust and lies, Amara had been rebuilding herself. Worse still, people were beginning to notice the difference. Her name was now spoken with respect in meetings he was no longer invited to. At home, his frustration grew thicker. Ngozi was no longer the exciting mistress that had fueled his ego. She was now a loud, hormonal, attention-starved woman who complained constantly. Every morning it was a new demand. Antenatal bills, baby clothes, diapers, a new AC, because this heat is killing me. Her pregnancy had become a weapon she wielded with no shame. Chike began to regret everything. The thrill of the affair had worn off, and all that remained was tension. When he snapped one evening and yelled at her, "You're choking me," she threw a cup of Gary water at him and screamed, "Then go back to your frozen prayer warrior wife." He stared at her, stunned. The same woman who once worshipped the ground he walked on now mocked him too. His kingdom of betrayal was beginning to rot from the inside, and Amara, quiet, distant, unreachable Amara, was the only name that still made sense in his head. He began calling her late at night, hoping for some sign of the soft woman he once controlled. But her phone was always off. He texted. No reply. One afternoon, he sat in his car outside her office building, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. When she finally walked out, she wasn't alone. She was laughing, with a tall, elegant man in a navy blue kaftan, who opened the car door for her like she was royalty. Chike's heart dropped. He recognized the man. It was Mr. Osakwe, his boss. The same man who used to respect him. The same man who had now grown cold and distant. Watching Amara disappear into that car was the moment Chike realized he had not just lost his wife. He had lost everything. The foundation of his success, the softness that once made him strong, the woman who covered his shame. He had traded it all for lust and mockery. And now he was a man drowning in a flood he created. Ngozi could feel it. The shift in the air, the disinterest in Chike's eyes, the heavy silences between them. She tried to ignore it, tried to pretend everything was fine. But the cracks were undeniable. The man who once couldn't keep his hands off her now barely touched her at all. He stayed out late, came home smelling of frustration and whiskey, and sometimes sat in the car for long stretches before entering the house. She knew something had changed, but she couldn't place it. Until the day she overheard him murmuring Amara's name in his sleep. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there. She stood over him, staring, her swollen belly tight with rage. The same Amara she had mocked, disrespected, and tried to erase was now haunting her nights. Ngozi knew then that her power was slipping, that the throne she built on stolen affection was beginning to collapse. In her panic, she tried to reclaim the spark. She cooked his favorite meals, wore tighter dresses, danced for him the way she used to. But Chike barely looked at her. One evening, after a failed attempt at intimacy, she broke down crying on the floor. "You used to love me," she sobbed. "You said I made you feel alive. Now you look at me like I'm a mistake." Chike didn't deny it. He simply stared at her and replied, "Maybe you were the mistake. Maybe we both were." The words landed like a blow. Ngozi's tears dried instantly. Her pride cracked. And for the first time since the affair began, she felt like a side chick again, a desperate woman chasing a man who was already halfway gone. That night, she stared at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the person looking back. She saw a woman who won a battle but lost her soul. The following week, she tried to reach Amara. She called twice. No answer. She sent a message. "I know we're not sisters anymore. But please, I need to talk. Just 1 hour. I'm tired." Amara saw it, read it, and ignored it. She owed Ngozi nothing. Her silence was the only closure they both deserved. Ngozi felt the weight of that silence more than any insult. She realized that Amara had moved on, not with a man, but with peace. And that peace was louder than any clapback or revenge. It was a mirror that showed Ngozi the truth. She had become a prisoner of her own choices. The baby growing in her belly didn't feel like a blessing anymore. It felt like an anchor, tying her to a man who no longer cared, and a sister who would never look back. It was a Thursday afternoon when Amara was called into the executive lounge of her office. The logistics summit she had recently attended had brought in 2 major clients, and her presentation had gone viral within the company. Mr. Osakwe stood waiting, his usual calm demeanor laced with something deeper, something personal. "Close the door," he said. Amara did, her heart racing slightly. She respected him. He had always treated her fairly, with dignity. But today, his eyes held a kind of admiration that felt different. "You've transformed, Amara," he said. "You carry pain like armor. And yet you walk like someone who has already forgiven the world." She smiled softly, unsure of where the conversation was going. Then he stepped closer. "You know, I lost my wife years ago," he continued. "I thought I would never be able to love again. But watching you, I realize strength is beautiful. And quiet strength? That's divine." Amara's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't being dramatic or manipulative. His tone was respectful, sincere. "I'm not trying to complicate your life," he added. "But I would be lying if I said I don't want to be part of your healing. Not as a rescuer, but as a man who sees you completely." He didn't rush her. He didn't push. He simply offered his heart in the most dignified way possible. Amara stood in silence for a long moment, her mind racing. She thought of Chike, of the betrayal, of the pain. But then she thought of how far she had come. She was no longer broken. She was no longer waiting to be rescued. She was a woman who had earned her peace. And here was a man offering her companionship, not as a replacement, but as a reward. That night, Amara didn't sleep. She sat by her window, sipping tea, watching the stars. Her phone buzzed, another message from Mgoi, another missed call from Chike. But she ignored them both. Her past had lost all power. The only voice she listened to now was her own. By morning, she sent a single text to Mr. Osakwe. Yes. One word. But that word held 7 years of betrayal, 3 years of silence, 1,000 nights of tears, and the first breath of freedom. She wasn't choosing him out of revenge. She wasn't doing it to make anyone jealous. She was choosing him because he saw her, and because she had finally seen herself. The news hit Lagos like wildfire. It began as a whisper in boardrooms and blossomed into full-blown gossip across industry circles, social media, and church groups. Amara? The Amara? Engaged to Chief Osakwe. Some didn't believe it. Others said it was fake. But when the photos surfaced, Amara in a flowing navy blue gown, hand gently resting on the arm of the powerful, widowed logistics magnate, there was no denying the truth. She wasn't just engaged. She was glowing. And she wasn't doing it to announce anything. The image came from someone who had seen them together at a private foundation dinner, an unplanned capture of grace, dignity, and rebirth. Her smile in the photo wasn't loud. It was calm, content, as if she had nothing left to prove. And that silence became the loudest thunder Chike had ever heard in his life. At his office, Chike was the last to know. His phone buzzed relentlessly that morning. Colleagues sent him links, images, and screen-recorded voice notes from the company WhatsApp group. He stared at the photo on his screen in disbelief. Amara, his Amara, now fiancé to the very man whose office he used to enter with pride. Osakwe, the same man Chike used to boast about during dinner with friends. "My boss is one of the most respected in this industry," he had once said. Now that man was holding Amara's hand. The same hand Chike used to mock for being too plain, too prayerful, too wifely. The irony was bitter. Chike felt his throat dry up as he read the caption beneath the photo. "Quiet strength finds its equal." It wasn't just a relationship. It was a message, a declaration, a reckoning. When he got home that evening, he stormed into the apartment like a whirlwind. Ngozi was watching television, her feet propped up, eating suya. "What is this rubbish I'm seeing online?" he barked. She turned to him, confused. "What?" Before she could finish, he threw the phone in her direction. She picked it up, her eyes narrowing as she saw the photo. At first, she scoffed. "This one? Staged. You know your wife. She's too boring to catch a man like that." But the longer she stared, the quieter she became. Because she could see it now, Amara wasn't faking. She wasn't posing. She wasn't showing off. She had truly moved on. Ngozi's hand trembled slightly. "She's doing this to mock us," she whispered. But Chike already knew the truth. Amara wasn't mocking anyone. She had outgrown them both. And that was the deepest cut of all. That night, Chike didn't sleep. He tossed and turned, tormented by flashes of what could have been, images of Amara washing his socks, praying beside him during the hard times, wiping his forehead when he faked illness. The same woman he once dismissed as too holy had become untouchable. Her voice that once pleaded for love was now silent, and that silence echoed in his soul like thunder in a dry sky. He picked up his phone again, scrolling through her recent photos, stopping on one where she stood beside Mr. Osakwe, her eyes soft but strong. "How did I lose this woman?" he muttered. He reached for whiskey, his new coping mechanism. He drank until the room spun, and still her image danced in his head, Amara in a new life he could no longer reach. The next morning, he made the mistake of calling her. Not once, but 5 times. Each call rang and rang, then stopped. No voicemail. No "Amara can't come to the phone right now." Just dead silence. Then, on the 6th attempt, his call went straight to voicemail. That was the first time he broke. He sat on the bathroom floor and wept, not angry, not defensive, just broken. Not because he wanted her back, but because he finally understood the cost of what he had thrown away. He remembered how Amara used to iron his clothes without being asked, how she stood by him when he lost 2 jobs in 1 year, how she sold her gold jewelry to keep them afloat. And he had repaid her by mocking her body, her prayers, and her loyalty. "You don't know the value of peace until you lose it to chaos," he thought bitterly. And Mgoi was chaos. Later that week, his boss sent him an email. Cold, formal, effective immediately. Chike was being transferred to a lesser branch in Ibadan. Due to internal restructuring and ongoing performance reviews, the email read. But Chike knew better. He had become a stain, a liability. His connection to Amara had once protected him. Now, her name only reminded people of what he had lost. At the office, no one met his eyes. No one shook his hand goodbye. He packed his things alone, exited through the back staircase, and drove home to a dim apartment and a pregnant woman whose smile now felt like a prison gate. He sat in his car for hours, refusing to go inside. Not because he was ashamed, but because for the first time in his adult life, he was truly, utterly alone. Mgoi sat on the bed, knees folded to her chest, staring at the walls like they held secrets she couldn't decipher. Chike hadn't spoken to her all day. He had come home from work, slammed the door, and collapsed on the couch without a word. When she asked what was wrong, he waved her off like a fly. When she brought him water, he pushed it away. Her once proud man, the one who made her feel like a goddess, now looked like a beggar in his own house, unkempt, bitter, and haunted. And worst of all, he no longer touched her. Her belly had grown heavy, her ankles swollen, her back constantly ached. She had traded her youth, her pride, and her family for this man. And now he didn't even look at her. The victory she once flaunted had become a life sentence. She picked up her phone again, staring at the photos from the birthday she threw for herself just 6 months ago. Back then, she had posted with bold captions, "The chosen one. What you refuse to appreciate, someone else will." She had worn a gold dress that hugged her belly and lips that curled with triumph. But now, looking at those photos made her feel sick. There was no applause anymore. Even her friends had gone quiet. Most of them had turned to gossip when Amara's engagement went public. "Waladeo," one friend had texted her privately. "I thought you said she would never recover." Mgoi blocked her. But the damage was done. The world had seen her gloat. Now they were watching her crumble. And there was no sympathy for a thief whose stolen crown was fading. In desperation, Mgoi called her mother. She hadn't spoken to her in months, not since their mother subtly hinted that what she did to Amara was unforgivable. "Mama, I'm tired," she cried over the phone. "Chike, he's not the same. I can't do this alone." There was a pause. Then her mother's voice, soft but firm. "You made your bed, Mgoi. Lie in it. I warned you not to dance on your sister's tears. Did you think those tears wouldn't water something stronger?" The line went silent. Mgoi dropped the phone and burst into sobs. Her cries filled the room, but there was no one to console her. Not Chike, not friends, not family. She was alone, and in that loneliness, She finally tasted the same silence Amara had endured. Except this time, it was permanent. The corporate dinner at Lagos Continental Hotel was a grand affair. The event was organized to celebrate top-tier business leaders and executives across West Africa's logistics and transport sector. Amara arrived not seeking attention, but she became the center of it. Dressed in a flowing emerald green evening gown that kissed her curves gracefully, her natural hair pulled up into a regal puff, and her skin glowing with quiet elegance, she walked in beside Chief Osakwe, her fiancé, now officially introduced as her future husband and the guest of honor. Photographers swarmed. Journalists whispered her name. The same Amara who once cried alone in a kitchen while her sister mocked her had become the most photographed woman of the night. But she didn't smile to mock anyone. She smiled because she had survived the fire and come out gold. At the far end of the hall, Chike sat in the back with a crumpled collar and forced smile. He had begged a former colleague for a last-minute invitation, hoping to network and stay visible. He didn't expect to see Amara, and he definitely didn't expect to see her like this. She moved with confidence he no longer recognized. Her laugh no longer sought his validation. Her joy no longer had anything to do with him. As the MC introduced Chief Osakwe and Amara to the stage, thunderous applause erupted. Chike remained seated, stunned, his hands frozen in place. He couldn't look away. It was like watching a version of the future that could have been his, if only he hadn't gambled her love away for lust and ego. Mgoi, who had insisted on tagging along just to see something, sat beside Chike wearing a faded wig, oversized maternity gown, and swollen feet jammed into tight sandals. She looked nothing like the femme fatale she once pretended to be. As Amara took the mic and gracefully thanked her mentors, ending with sometimes, pain is just the beginning of purpose, a hush fell across the room. People turned to look at Chike. Whispers began again. Isn't that his ex-wife? That's the woman his sister stole her husband from, and she's now marrying his boss? The weight of shame crushed him. And Mgoi? She could barely breathe. Her stomach cramped as she watched her sister shine under the same spotlight she once tried to steal. In that room filled with success and power, they were the only two who didn't belong. 2 weeks after the event, Amara sat in her new home, an elegant duplex gifted to her by her now husband-to-be. The house was quiet, peaceful, the kind of peace that couldn't be bought. She stood by the glass balcony with a cup of tea, overlooking the city lights. It felt like her soul had exhaled. There were no more pity looks, no more whispers behind her back. She had earned this silence, fought for it with blood, tears, and restraint. Chief Osakwe came up behind her, gently wrapping his arms around her waist. Still thinking? He asked. She smiled and leaned into him. Not thinking, she replied. Just grateful. And truly she was. Not because of the wealth, not because of the status, but because she had finally proven to herself that betrayal doesn't get the last word. Resilience does. Chike, meanwhile, had relocated to Ibadan for the branch transfer. He lived in a cramped 2-bedroom flat with peeling paint and a rusted ceiling fan. His calls to Lagos stopped being returned. His emails bounced. The friends who once hailed him were now connected to Amara. And Mgoi? She left one morning with her baby strapped to her chest and her pride tucked between her knees. No goodbye. No drama. Just silence. She had become a ghost of her former self, moving from flat to flat, asking friends for money, muttering about regrets in between coughs and colic cries. Her baby, innocent and unaware, was the only source of light in her world now, a constant reminder of choices made in foolishness. Her own mother no longer answered her calls. She was alone. And now she understood what Amara had endured. But unlike Amara, there would be no redemption. The story closed, not with screaming or revenge, but with dignity. Amara never once cursed them. She never fought dirty. She never lowered herself to the level of those who laughed at her. Instead, she rose. Slowly, silently, unapologetically. Her revenge was not in wealth or titles. It was in peace. It was in the way Chike choked when he saw her photos. It was in Ngozi's tears when she realized no one would ever trust her again. It was in the silence that followed her name when people realized she had won, not through noise, but through grace. And as she walked down the aisle weeks later, hand in hand with the man who saw her pain and chose to love her still, Amara didn't walk like a scorned woman. She walked like a queen. Because, in the end, she wasn't just the woman who was betrayed. She was the woman who survived and became unforgettable. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.